Hello and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. I'm joined by Shannon Barlow, who's the Managing Director of Frog Recruitment. She's here to talk about the job market. Just a few hours ago, Statistics New Zealand released the Household Labour Force Survey for the June quarter. This shows unemployment at 3.3%. Although this is slightly higher than 3.2% in March, it's still at a very low level by historic standards. And for the June year, Statistics New Zealand says salary and wage rates rose 3.4% and average ordinary time hourly earnings increased 6.4%. These are the biggest increases since 2008. And nearly two-thirds of roles surveyed by Stats NZ reported an increase in ordinary time wage rates in the June year, which is the highest level since this series began in 1993. On top of this, private sector total hourly earnings were up 7.1% annually, which is almost keeping pace with the highest inflation in 32 years of 7.3%. Welcome, Shannon, and thanks for joining us. In response to the Statistics New Zealand data, Business NZ CEO Kirk Hope suggested New Zealand's caught up in a global war for talent, and it certainly does seem like every business you visit or every business owner you talk to at the moment, no matter what industry they're in, is looking for staff. Is this what you're seeing?
Fortunately, yeah, that's absolutely true. So it's very widespread and something that's affecting all of New Zealand and across all business sectors.
Are there any industries that are, finding the going particularly tough at the moment in terms of attracting staff? And I guess opposite of that, are there any industries who are actually not struggling to find staff at the moment?
I don't think there's any that aren't struggling, so we are seeing it across the board. And the struggle to find and as well as to retain staff is definitely something that's being experienced all across the country. There are some industries that are feeling the effects a little bit more than others, and particularly where that disruption from the market and the effects of the pandemic have been greater. So some of those are due to the global supply chain issues. So industries like transport and logistics particularly are really feeling that pressure. And then there's the flow-on effect to other industries impacted by the supply of materials, so for example construction and engineering. So some of those areas like engineering where they're seeing that greater demand, for example for the redevelopment of ageing infrastructure. So the demand for work is still there, and particularly at the start of the year businesses were looking to ramp up. We've got through, we're out of lockdowns, we're ready to go, we want to boost production or build our business, but the staff just haven't been there to be able to do that. I think some of the other areas that are struggling are some of those lower paid industries and industries where there's historically been a reliance on a migrant workforce. So for example, hospitality and retail tend to be at the lower level wages, and aged care as well, where it typically rely on staff from overseas. So we've talked about Kiwis experiencing a virtual pay cut. So where even if they're being paid the same amount or perhaps have had a small increase, in practical terms, they're essentially going backwards. As the bullet train of rising living costs keeps powering on, their wages just aren't going to stretch as far. And retail and hospitality are prime examples of that. So wages haven't kept pace with inflation for the last decade or so. My barista downstairs informs me, but he's right. So they were already struggling without all the added pressures, and now the only increases they may have had may have been with the increases in minimum wage. So the demand's still so high for workers, and many are having to walk away from their current roles because, why mask up and serve customers for minimum wage when perhaps I could use those customer service skills in another area and get paid more, or go to a completely different industry where they are seeing pay wages, start manning a stop and go sign for 10% more.
Yeah, it's interesting. Are you actually seeing examples of people, going from, I guess, hospitality to that stop and go example? Because that's paid more. I guess it's quite a different type of job, isn't it? So are people prepared to really change what they're doing to get a bit more money at the end of the month or the end of the week?
Well, I think they're being, in a way, they're being forced into that situation. But also because all the different sectors are struggling to find staff, there's more of a flexibility or openness to look at entry-level people or people who haven't worked in the industry before and say, actually, we can get them in at the ground level, so it doesn't matter what the background is. And for the job seekers, if they're getting paid a much better starting wage, why not?
And how desperate are some of the employers out there that you're dealing with at the moment? What sort of things are they prepared to do to attract or keep staff at the moment?
Definitely, it's that finding staff or retaining talent is the number one problem for businesses across New Zealand. And a big part of what they need to do, or what businesses need to do, is to be able to look at, okay, well how can we stand out from our competitors, to be able to attract a small amount of talent that is available at the moment, but at the same time to be able to hold on to their current workers as well. For some of these businesses, they might be in a position where the answer's pretty obvious. We can pay them more. And in some sectors, we are seeing some quite huge increases. But it is from the stats today, that obviously isn't across the board, but we're seeing, in some areas it might be up to 20-30% increases, which is hard to resist. But of course, not all businesses have the luxury or the capacity to be able to do that. So they have to think of other ways to increase the likelihood of being able to attract new staff. So looking at things like, I guess it's the total picture, or looking at the organisation and its culture as a whole, and being able to put forward that value proposition. So, I think when we look at 2021, it was the focus, it was the year of wellbeing. So it was good that businesses recognised the importance of mental health and wellbeing, and really put in some good initiatives to be able to help stave off and protect from burnout for their staff. So, we saw things like yoga, mindfulness, EAP, you name it, it was there. But I think in 2022, cash is king. So, yes, the benefits are important, but if you're able to boost that salary, then that's going to be your best bet.
And that doubtless is related to the rising cost of living we're hearing about at the moment, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with that move in wage inflation, so up to 3.4 from 3% the previous quarter. So it's great, it's moving in the right direction, but it's not doing enough to be able to offset CPI and those living costs. So, and particularly seeing that, I think it was 2/3, 66% of roles did see an increase this year, so in either salary or wages. So that's really positive news. But of course, those increased amounts just aren't enough to be able to keep pace with inflation at whopping 7.3. And that gap of 4 percentage points really does have a massive impact on people's budgets. And there are many who are out there doing it tough right now.
You did mention, however, though, some industries where there were up to 20 to 30% wage rises going on. I'm fascinated. Who's getting that?
Who's getting that, and where can I join the queue to there? Yeah. Some of those areas have been around manufacturing, transport and logistics. So again, some of those sectors that have felt the pain more, but also it's big business and there are large companies in the area. So again, the larger companies are able to do that, or to look at their overall position and say, right, we need to do this to secure enough hands on deck to be able to keep things running and to actually grow through this period. So we'll put the carrot out there to be able to attract these staff and get an edge. But of course, not everyone has the capacity to do that. But with such high demand for services and that need for labour to deliver, if you're able to do that, then it makes sense to make those offers and do what you've got to do to secure your staff.
I'm just curious as to whether you have much visibility on, I guess, the movement or interest you might be seeing from people overseas in terms of looking for jobs in New Zealand, either people wanting to return home or migrate here now that is becoming possible again. And then alternatively, do you have any visibility of the opposite of Kiwis, I guess, looking to move overseas and find a job before they go, whether it be to Australia or further afield?
Yeah, sure. So we're definitely starting to see Kiwis returning home. And now that recently the borders are fully opened, we're starting to see on the recruitment desk, we're getting a lot more overseas applications, particularly for people looking to migrate here. So the likes of South Africa, India, Singapore, Fiji, and as well as some movement from the UK as well. I think New Zealand's still seen as a great place to live, probably more so for the overall lifestyle, not so much the dollars. That's going to be something that we need to be able to look at to be competitive with a global market for talent as well.
So that's higher wages?
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess just like the All Blacks, we can't rely on past glories either. So I noticed that Auckland and Wellington had both nosedived in the world's most livable cities rankings. So we do have the Prime Minister out flying the flag, almost quite literally, to bring back the tourists and bring back the working holiday makers and looking at migrants to work here. But I think there's, the world has changed and there's a lot that we still need to do to be able to make sure that we're going to have a big enough pool. We're a small country and having that workforce available just has such a huge impact. I think on the flip side is we are starting to see Kiwis moving overseas, or it might be, there's a lot of younger people started to head overseas. It's been 2.5 years that they haven't been able to have the big OE, so they're champing at the bit to get off and discover the world. So there's a big area there where they will be moving. I think we always have to compete with Australia. They're close by, similar culture. I think there's that perception of higher salaries and lower living costs. Well, the liver might be lower as well. Who knows? But so we always have that competition, as well as, of course, higher superannuation. And I was going to say better weather, but I'm not so sure about that in the past 12 months. We've probably tipped them on that one.
Certainly it's been wetter there even than here, hasn't it? And on the east coast of Australia anyway. So that's not been great. Overlaying all of this is the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that has entailed, I guess, since early 2020. So sort of 2.5 years now. I just wonder, to what extent has the pandemic sort of ushered in a bit of a sea change in the job market? I mean, how different are things now than they were in 2019?
There's no questioning that it's had a massive impact on the labour market, but you do have to take into account that we were already experiencing a labour shortage pre-pandemic, so I guess you can't blame COVID for everything. So if we look at unemployment, so in 2019 we had, at the time, it was record low unemployment at 4%. And even through the pandemic, it peaked at 5.3 in 2020, which would still be the envy of most Western countries for an unemployment rate. And as we know, now back down to 3.3. But I think what COVID did was added new factors and kind of supercharged existing factors that were affecting the labour shortage. So if we look at the population structure, so we're a country full of baby boomers who are heading into retirement, so that pool of labour was already shrinking, and we had that smaller working population, so it was already a problem, and then the pandemic has exacerbated that. With the it being a skills short market, there's limited movement through COVID, obviously, and particularly in the first year or so, if you were able to keep your job, you stayed in that job and stayed put. So there wasn't that usual flow, the natural flow between organisations and creating new opportunities. With the closed borders, of course, it heightened the skills shortage. And as I mentioned, many of those industries, particularly the likes of agriculture, hospitality and healthcare, really rely on that migrant labour. So there's going to have to be some quite dramatic changes in how they look at their workforce and the future planning for those areas, so there isn't such a reliance. What are some of the other things? Vaccine mandates, of course. So we had an already small pool of available talent, and that just reduced that already diminished talent pool or labour force. And burnout, and I've called it the mid-COVID crisis. So talked about some of those major lifestyle changes, so people really reflecting on their lives and going, oh, actually, what is important, and do I want to go back to my corporate role and keep doing what I'm doing, or has this opened my eyes, and should I move to the country, grow some vegetables, or really give being an artist a proper go, that kind of thing. So we did start to see people moving right out of the industry and out of the workforce.
That's what has become known internationally as the Great Resignation. And have you seen a lot of that?
Yes, we have. So I think it is starting to level out a little bit now, but definitely towards the end of last year, we started seeing that coming through in early this year as well, where the balance of power, which had always been on the employer's side or with business, suddenly switched to the candidate or to a job seeker or the employee. They had more options, as well as that feeling of, I've done my time, I've helped us get through this really challenging time, I've put in extra hours, I've given my all for the business, but now it's time to look after me, and I put my career on hold for a time just to get through this situation. But now caring so much about how good, talented employees are in such high demand, and so it's time for me to take advantage of that. We're seeing with that shift in the balance of power, job seekers are really using the market conditions as a bargaining chip to be able to secure better conditions, so and definitely including pay. And with increased living costs, I guess a lot of people are in a situation where they literally can't afford not to do that, and why wouldn't you take that opportunity? So we're seeing now that every dollar counts, and candidates won't look at another role unless they can see that they're going to be better off, particularly financially, so looking at a minimum 5 to 10% pay increase. I think that Other thing that we're starting to see is businesses are being a lot more aggressive in terms of headhunting or poaching staff from competitors, particularly for critical roles across the business. But I also think that our attitudes towards headhunting have changed as well. So, towards the end of last year, when we started to see I guess we started to see the light at the end of the lockdown tunnel, and people started looking at their options and going, okay, well, maybe I can go after something better. And we started to utter the phrase, the Great Resignation. We saw our people being lured across the Tasman, and we thought, typical Aussies tend to have a more aggressive style. And then we heard more stories of managers moving companies and perhaps shoulder tapping their old teammates to come work with them. And now we've got to a point that's almost expected that your staff will be approached. It's not that you're going to like that, but I guess now it's not really seen so much as doing the dirty. It's kind of fair play. Everybody's got to do what they need to do. And on the other side, we'll do what we need to do to be able to keep our staff as well.
One of the things that's also emerged through COVID, in New Zealand, sort of certainly more this year, since we've really had COVID in the community, is people taking more sick leave. Now, obviously, there's been isolation rules in place if you have COVID or you're a household contact, so that's been a part of it. But also, if you have even a bit of a sniffle, you're sort of paranoid. Oh, everyone's going to think I have COVID. I should stay home, and everything that entails. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering how big of an impact is this having? And there's an interesting thing I picked up on the other day. So Scott Kirby, who's the CEO of United Airlines in the US, in an interview, he said that they are looking at having permanently needing 4 to 5% more employees because of people taking more sick leave. Now, some people will say it's hard to have sympathy for the airlines because obviously they laid off, thousands of staff through COVID. But that's still an interesting figure, that if you have people off sick more often, then you need to cover them. Is that something can you quantify that in the New Zealand market at all?
Well, speaking of airlines, I was saying, well, it's proof in point. I don't know if you've made it overseas just yet, but trying to get back from Sydney and the debacle through the airport there, it's definitely a problem, and you do need more staff. But again, I think that's common across the board, where businesses are struggling with, with trying to ramp up and either keep their business going or to be able to push for new levels and grow. But they're already working with smaller teams than they would usually have, or they're not at their capacity, and then you might have 20-30% of your staff off sick or isolating with COVID and unable to do the work. So it's really challenging to be able to deliver your services or to keep up with demand for your business when you're operating short-staffed all the time. So, I think that's definitely a big challenge for everyone, really.
Just to sort of wrap up, Shannon, I'm just sort of interested, it's a really interesting job or labour market, and you've painted a really good picture of what's going on out there. I guess if I was an employer or someone who was looking for staff and struggling, or an industry that's particularly struggling, is there any circuit breaker out there? I mean, what could that be? Would it be that we sort of open the floodgates again to immigration? I mean, is that the sort of circuit breaker? And then I guess if I'm a worker, I might be quite enjoying this market at the moment, that I can get higher wages and I can move around and I can change careers, and it's not too hard to do that. So I guess you're painting a picture of it's more of a worker or employees market at the moment. And is there anything that could change that in the short to medium term?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's clearly not an easy problem to solve. With the borders recently fully opened, as well as a lot of changes through to immigration settings, so particularly with skilled visas, will provide some relief. But the skill shortage isn't going to disappear overnight, and in fact it could even get worse for a period of time. So, if we look at all those drivers for people to move overseas, so either to Australia or further ashore, there is that chance that we could lose more people than we gain. And of course, as inflation increases as well, businesses will need to look at costs and to be able to find ways to get around that labour shortage, whether that's via things like automation and looking at remote workers. So we are seeing those shifts in, I guess, the mindset of businesses. And we've seen it with remote working particularly, or flexible working from home. Through the pandemic, we proved, yes, we can do this. And most of the time, it's not at, diminishing productivity. So you were able to operate, but all the other benefits that come from having people on board and in the office. We are very different to the US, but it is helpful to be able to look at the trends that we see there. So the Great Resignation happened there first, and you can see how things, or get a bit of a tip, I guess, on how things may play out. We're starting to hear from over in the US that there's a little bit of remorse from some of those people who made the move early and decided to leave the company they were with and to either chase the money or other benefits and go elsewhere. So we're seeing that although the salary is obviously really important, and particularly in this market with such high living costs, it's always going to be a huge factor, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So, we're starting to see on the ground now it levelling out a little bit. So there's less movement, or I think candidates are definitely being more considered in making a move and looking at the total picture as well, instead of that snap decision perhaps based on just on salary.
Look, thanks a lot for that, Shannon. It's really interesting to take a look under the hood, I guess, so to speak, of what's going on out there in the job and employment market. That's Shannon Barlow, who's the Managing Director of Frog Recruitment, and I'm Gareth Vaughan at interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest podcast.